everyone. This is Philosophy of the People with Ben Birch. This is Stefan Bertram. And this week we are talking about JD Vance, his intellectual influences or lack therefor. Ben, before the show, I was looking at Paralympic stuff, and I was thinking that surely, in the future, there's going to be various events in the Paralympics which are faster than the normal ones or whatever in the Olympics. And then I was like, oh no, it's already the case. In
Oh,
everything above 400 meters, wheelchair is faster than legs.
which does make some intuitive sense.
They've got terrible acceleration, but once they get going, they're much faster.
Right.
Like across
Fair enough.
5,000 meters, they're like 3 minutes faster. Uh,
Uh, all
but
right.
yes, I
Yeah.
also it was since we've been on our show, Britain has become fascist or whatever, or become fascist in a different way. Become less miserably fascist and more energetically fascist. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it didn't last for long. I was going to go to the rubberneck at the local thing that was happening yesterday, but it looked so boring on the internet that I didn't bother going.
yeah. I mean, I do think that I keep seeing the phrase like riot or, race riot. And I do think that the more old timey word is probably more apt here. Pogrom is probably better captures the energetic fascism.
Well, it was quite disparate. There were certainly places where it was like intercommunal violence, and then there's other places where the worst of it was given to the police, and not just because they were defending some strategic location, but just because they were in the middle of town. Obviously, that's what happens when you have kind of. I mean, this is very like. This is what anarchists want, right?
Yeah.
Just like a sudden upsurge of the people without direction. In that circumstance, yeah, you did lead to some things which are basically kind of in the style of pogrom or attempted pogrom or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you see? Have you have you seen Elon Musk's interventions on this?
yeah, they've been pretty great. It is funny when people are like, "Oh, this person's been arrested in the UK for saying things," and the thing that they've been arrested for is saying like, "Go to this migrant hotel. It's 6:42 p.m. today and burn it to the ground." Which I'm
Yeah.
not sure should receive like three
No, but
years in prison
you
for or
should.
whatever. But like,
Well, like that is the sort of thing that, in fact, the police should take an interest in.
yeah, you
If
should be
you
like arrested or whatever. Like, I don't think you need to be immediately thrown in jail. But like,
No, yeah, that's right. It's like when uh, Noah, God, what's his name? The guy. Sorry, Noah Berlatsky. I can't believe I forgot that man's name. I remember there was a Noah Berlatsky controversy a while back that was about him saying something incredibly stupid, which is how every Noah Berlatsky's controversy starts. But in this particular case, he said some dodgy things about age of consent related issues, and the and somebody. I remember somebody defending it. It was like, well, if you look at it, it's like it's really just sort of standard like anti-carceral, pro-sex work kind of takes, but he's talking about underage prostitutes. It's like, yeah, I don't know, man. I think whatever you think about the larger issue, if adults are paying to have sex with minors, that is indeed something law enforcement should take an interest in. It's like kind of the same thing here. It's like, look, there might be, I mean, I certainly think that there are actual, free speech concerns about, some of the ways that British law works as far as stuff like this goes. But it's like, man, this is not the example you want to use. to make that case, right? You know, they're like, this is actually, it's like, no, you should absolutely be arrested if you post that.
Because
But
in the UK, you can be arrested basically under any circumstances because you can be arrested on suspicion of doing like a if there's reasonable concern that you might in the future breach the peace,
yeah,
you can be arrested. So
yeah, that's too much.
being arrested in the UK is like there's no getting wrongful arrest requires like the police to fuck up basically and to like be like we're arresting you on this basis and then that not be a reasonable basis. Well, if they'd been smart about it, they'd be fine.
Yeah,
But yes,
Jacob, since I'm the one who's doing this from Rosarito, I suppose that, given the premise that one of us must be Jason, it must be me. Um,
you're both pox.
yeah. But my favorite Elon thing was he posted the thing apparently with reference to the British riots. He posted that
Yeah, it's like in Harry Potter, you didn't support the Death Eaters.
exactly as you watched the Hunger Games and sided with the Resistance. You watched Star Wars and sided with the Resistance. You watched The Matrix and sided with the Resistance. You watched Divergent and sided with the Resistance. You watched V for Vendetta and sided with the Resistance. When it's fiction, you understand, yet you refuse to see it when it's the reality you're living in. Wild, which above and beyond anything else you could say about like the politics of that, honestly, my overwhelming thought is how does 53-year-old Elon Musk sound like just the dumbest kind of 15-year-old anarchist there?
I mean, but also like I didn't actually bother to reverse Google search it, but you feel like that meme could have been made. Surely, like from the references, that's a meme from like 2014. Like it was probably like referencing my damn.
Yeah, I mean that would also be very much in character for
It was probably a BLM meme to be honest.
yeah. Um,
Your fan is kind of annoying when it swings towards you. I don't think you need to turn it off, but you can probably like push it back a little.
let's do that.
But yeah, JD Vance.
JD
Um,
Vance.
Very
Yeah.
funny that Trump nominated him. It's really funny that Republicans were like, yeah, they're just gonna. I mean, we would never get rid of. I don't. I think doing this kind of psychologicalizing stuff is normally silly, but I do think the Republicans were like, well, we would never get rid of Trump, regardless of how highly regarded he becomes. So the Democrats will never get rid of Biden, and then they got rid of Biden, and then they've just fallen to bits. Like Trump is just on TV complaining that they got rid of Biden. He's
Yeah.
complaining that like he's like, why did I debate Biden? Because I killed him and now he's gone and now I can't win.
No, I mean yeah. Biden, Trump clearly wanted to run against Biden. He didn't think. I mean, it's been doing like the years of Sleepy Joe is demented and out of it, and that's why you need to elect me. And clearly did not want to run against Kamala Harris. And I think which um, look, I think Kamala Harris. Don't get me wrong. If I can talk Jacobin into this, maybe I want to write something soon about why Harris doesn't deserve nearly as much of a honeymoon as she's been getting. From a lot of the left. She sucks
I
very
mean,
much.
the stuff about Wiles getting nominated is like the DSA being conquering kings was like, I mean, like 2016 and 2020, Bernie stuff was basically like already a farce of like earlier movements. But that's like the farce of the farce of the farce, like completely and utterly degenerate kind of like, actually, this is like us doing socialism.
Yeah.
Because like the
Uh,
moderate Zionist, moderate Republican guy won over like the guy that was literally in the IDF.
yeah. I mean, I think that Waltz is about as close to an okay social democrat as you get in like fairly mainstream uh, democratic politics. I don't think that the evidence that like he's really all that much better on Israel is very convincing. I think that's pretty thin. Um, but regardless of Waltz's merits or demerits, it's also just like, come on, man, this is so sad. We didn't make this happen, right? I mean, this is like the somebody Eric Carlos Torren to give the man his due. Posted, when I posted about this, he responded with this, guess some Mexican parable about like this. The elephant comes upon a tiger and they fight, and it lasts for a really long time, and finally the elephant, manages to defeat the tiger, and then he stops to rest, and he hears this voice from this ant that's on top of him saying, "We did it, brother. We beat the tiger." Like, come on, man. There's like, Harris picked Waltz instead of Shapiro because they had better chemistry, and because Nancy Pelosi liked Waltz from, when they were in the House together. It has absolutely nothing to do with the left. I would absolutely love to believe that, DSA or Associated Forces were so powerful that politicians were like strategically having to appease them. I agree, moderate Republican is going way too far, but I don't
I
know.
didn't say modern Republican, did I?
I think you did. I think you didn't mean to, but
Oh, right. I meant Democrat. Sorry.
yeah,
But
Democrat.
yeah, he's obviously a Zionist.
Yeah, he's obviously a Zionist. Yeah, that much is true. That is but it's like
It's like white man reflexes. I was like, oh, it's a Republican.
has nothing to But yeah, it's. I would love to believe the DSA and Associated Forces were so powerful that politicians were always trying to appease them. But I don't think
That's what we're saying.
that's reality, sadly. But I think that on moving into the subject for today, I think on the Republican side, like, again, I don't think the left made her pick him, but I do think that Waltz was a smart pick for Harris.
Yeah,
I
well,
think
JD Vance is an insane disaster.
I think JD Vance is an insane pick for Trump. I think that I think that JD Vance is well, I mean, by all accounts, JD Vance was really being pushed by Eric and Don Jr. and Tucker Carlson, who are three people who might not particularly be in touch with the desires of like swing voters in Wisconsin. But it's like, you can imagine the conversations, come on, Dad, he's so based, let's get the, let's really,
Dad, we're on Discord together.
let's really do double mega, yeah, it's the guy is spectacularly unappealing, which I think is kind of a lucky break in a way, because I think that in a certain sense, what he's trying to do, if you like watch his speech at the RNC, he hit all of these kind of pseudo populist and pseudo anti-war notes. Again, has the disconnect between this and like the Trump record that he was all in favor of is amazing, but he hit all these notes that you could imagine a better politician than JD Vance like actually parlaying into a really effective pitch. And
Right,
I think
the problem is he's phony and risless, which you can't pull off one or the other.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like he, like there could be a really potent kind of right populism there, but I don't think he's the messenger for it. And, part of why he's not the messenger for it is that, I mean, look, there's been all this discourse about the political effectiveness of saying this, but putting all that aside, the fact is the man is extremely weird. And in a very particular kind of way that I'm very familiar with. And this is why, even though I know I'm stretching the definition of philosophy here, I saw that Politico had put out this article called "The Seven Thinkers and Groups Who Have Shaped JD Vance's Worldview," and it was thinkers and groups because they decided to throw on the entire Claremont Institute, right, which is this right wing think tank, West Coast Straussians, and so that's really six thinkers, of whom five are alive. Right, one of them is Rene Girard, who died several years ago. So that's six thinkers. Uh, Somewhat absurdly, Peter Thiel was thrown into the list. I don't know how much Peter Thiel thinks. He certainly.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think he thinks, but I wouldn't want to know what any of those thoughts are. I don't think he would. I don't think he wants to know. He wants anyone to know what any of those thoughts are.
So that leaves four. If you keep it down to the living thinkers and exclude Thiel. And then, as I was reading this list, I had this incredibly strange realization that out of the remaining four, that there are two of these guys who I have had some level of personal acquaintance with, and that's weird. And,
Oh fuck! Oh shit! I've already forgotten his name. Who's the other one?
yeah. So the two that I know are, and when I say I know, I don't just mean like one of the four is Patrick Deneen. I've certainly written about Deneen, right? But no, I mean I've met in person, had extensive interactions with, are Sohrab Ahmari and Curtis Yarvin. And
Your account of your encounter with Curtis Yarvin, he really came off as exactly the kind of guy I expected him to be.
yeah, he really comes off as somebody who would blog as Mencius Moldbug. That is just right.
It is crazy. He came up with the most unpleasantly nerdy name for himself that he could. It's some ways much more admirable than the people on Twitter who call themselves the base Bronze Age warrior or whatever,
Yeah,
Be like,
yeah.
I am the moldy bug.
Prester John says Peter Thiel found JD Vance in a rescue can in a little local Whole Foods parking lot. Yeah, not quite, but yeah, I'd certainly think that however much or little he may think, Peter Thiel is certainly an important figure in the story because
Well, I assume he gives money to at least some of the other people on the list.
exactly, yeah. I mean, he's in some ways the most important person on the list because however much thinking he does personally, he certainly finances the other ones, and he certainly finances Vance, right? So just a little capsule biography of JD Vance. He didn't actually grow up in Appalachia. He grew up in Ohio. He spent some summers with grandma in Kentucky, but whatever. Who's counting? And then he went to Yale Law School, and there's a stint in the Marines here. Although my understanding is that what he did in the Marines is he was a public affairs correspondent, which I think basically means he blogged for them. But in any case, I don't want to demean.
He's just like me.
that form of service, but and then yeah, I think you and JD Vance have killed as many people for better or worse. So and then after he gets out of Yale law school, he bumps around a few years if he does a
I mean, he
clerkship.
gets into Yale as like a DEI pick, right?
uh, yeah, I mean, I'm sure he had a hell of an essay. I mean, Hillbilly Elegy, as disgusting as I find that book, is well written, right? So I'm sure he was drawing on on all that stuff effectively. So there probably is some truth to that. But yeah, I mean, he does like sort of elite recent college graduate, recent law school graduate, sort of kicking around stuff, clerkship with a judge, I think he was working for a congressman at one point, and then he gets a job as a venture capitalist, working for Peter Thiel, Mithril Capital, and
How
this is
many businesses in the Appalachian Mountains does he hollow out?
well, when he was working as a venture capitalist, he was located in San Francisco for a few years, and because that is where VC tech bros go to do that, and then and this is the same period when he was doing that Hillbilly Elegy is coming out, which is a book that is, in some way, I mean, look, again, I think the writing is good. It's, there's certainly lots of striking stories, but I mean, the ideology of that book is very unabashedly uh, doing for poor white people what, in rural Appalachia, what, I
Pull
don't
up
know.
your pants literature.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's, yeah, rural poor white people, Bill Cosby, right? Is the pull your pants up. In fact, there's a line in the book where a couple lines where he praises Charles Murray, and and what Murray had written about inner city poverty, and says, oh, the same thing could apply to poverty in rural Kentucky. That I saw, he refers to some of the people he grew up with as welfare queens. Uh, that is a phrase that comes up in the book.
I'm sure they all thought he was very cool growing up.
I'm sure. Uh, he he says too many young men are afraid of work. He says there's a culture of poverty that goes deeper than macroeconomic policy.
He moves to
Uh,
the couch.
what's that?
Moves to the couch.
Yeah, he does not actually say. He does not actually say that he fucked a
Fake
couch.
news from the liberal media.
I think though that there have been some efforts to turn it around to be like, oh well, we could just tweet that I don't know, Tim Walz fucked a traffic code, and that'll be just as effective. It's like, no, the reason the Vance thing lands is that it's, even though he does not say that, right? That's a joke, right? The in Hillbilly Elegy, the joke feels directionally accurate. Um, there's a certain incel gamer vibe there.
I
That
also assume that Walls didn't like write a memoir when he was 31 or whatever.
right, also very true. So yeah, it's coming of age stories, so people sort of believe that it's in there. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it's I mean, my view is it's a pretty gross book because like he's throwing people you know neighbors and members of his extended family under the bus.
Yeah,
And
I think doing any narrative of like I'm from a fucked up place or whatever is something that is really difficult to do without it coming off as poverty porn or
uh,
whatever.
Kushlook, do better. I think you know what I'm saying. There are jokes that land because obviously they're not literally true, but they resonate with something, and there are jokes that don't land. I think that's a you must be this tall to ride the ride for having a discussion about this. But
No, I think everything is literally true based on vibes and feelings. I am Ben Shapiro's worst enemy.
fair enough. Yeah, it's so, but beyond that, right? Ideologically, right? It's just it's just outright. It's like the least populist thing ever, right? And in fact, I just last week I wrote something for Jacobin that sort of supplements the essay we're talking about here. Where I note that also, if you look at JD's, there's a classmate of his from Yale who is a trans woman who's friends with Vance for a long time, and then got pissed off enough about his subsequent evolution that she gave a bunch of their old emails to the New York Times, and yeah, I know, and it's pretty striking, right? So it's like not only is like Hillbilly Elegy the least economically populist book of all time, but it's like his cultural values in this era of his life don't seem to have been particularly conservative. In fact, like in one of the emails, he apologizes because he refers to her as a lesbian when, I'm going to get the phrase wrong, but like the phrase she'd prefer to use is like radical gender something. Anyway, whatever. It's a long phrase that includes gender, and he wanted to, and he was like,
this whole thing smacks of gender.
and he apologized for misdesignating her in Hillbilly Elegy, and she was like, oh, it's okay, people wouldn't have known what you meant. And
so it's not just like, it's even more than like pronouns or whatever. Like, he's like a respecter of esoteric sexuality labels, at least when they apply to his friends in private correspondence.
Exactly. Yes. And around the same time, in a message to another friend, he said he went back and forth. This is 2016. He went back and forth between thinking that Donald Trump was just a cynical asshole like Richard Nixon and thinking that he was America's Hitler. And
I was thinking that also, I mean, he's obviously in an interracial marriage, but at the time that he became a Republican, that was probably like the 10, 20 years where that wasn't a problem. And now it's a problem again.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think to be fair, I don't think that the overwhelming majority of Republicans that it's a problem, but I do think that the people for whom it is a problem have kind of crawled out from under their rocks and are more outspoken now.
But, yeah, they're very loud and they're close to people like JD Vance.
Yeah. So, I mean, Nick Fuentes had dinner with Donald Trump, right? So there's the line between the fringe and people more prominent is a little bit blurry. I mean, I understand that the excuse for that dinner is that he was invited along by Kanye West, who's a perfectly reasonable person to have dinner with. But in any case, that's, yeah. I mean, at the, so it seems like as of like 2016, 2017, JD Vance, I mean, he was a Republican. Like, I think as far as I can tell, he was always a Republican, but like, he is a never Trump kind of Republican. And, he had the exact same combination. He had the exact combination of views you'd more or less expect from a, never Trumper kind of Republican working as a venture capitalist in California after graduating from Yale Law School, right? Which is to say, very unsympathetic to poor people, but cosmopolitan enough to have, progressive social values, and sure, sympathetic to
so the complete reverse of a base populist in
exactly
understanding.
Exactly, right? So it's like, what happened?
Many people in many places that's called a liberal.
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah, yeah. So what happened in like by 2021, right? He was saying all the base populist things he is now, right? So what happened in those 5 years? Did he was he visited by the ghosts of hillbillies past, like the Scrooge, the Night Before Christmas.
I
Did
mean,
he
it wouldn't
have?
make him reading Medicious Moldbug, who presumably thinks less of common people than even JD Vance did.
Seems more like that second one, right? Like it seems like he has. I think that since he was inducted into the Tealverse, uh, he rubbed shoulders with a lot of people in that world. And, uh, to be fair, I think it's a bit of an open question how much influence some of them, some of these guys have actually had on him. But for one thing, this is a little too good for me not to write about because somehow the Republican candidate for vice president knows a weird number of the same people I know. And
I mean, if there's one thing I'd be critical about your essays, Ben, is that it's very good of you to stick strictly to the 3,000. But the fact that you sticking strictly to the 3,000 but still are maintaining the same level of anecdotes, meaning that a lot of that essay happened in the back of a taxi.
that's true. That's true. So yeah. So, and I should say too, right? I talk about this in the Jacobin article, but not in this essay. That in we could also add right to the list of people that I've interacted with who JD Vance has interacted with. Renowned Twitter user Amy Therese, who is was actually my predecessor as co-host of the Dead Pundit Society, and as around the time that I had taken on that role, she'd left a while before. She was undergoing a rapid political evolution.
Do you remember when she called me an Antifa super soldier?
I do remember that. Yes, actually, I do. I do. Yes. Uh, yeah, exactly. Right. So she was going to. I actually don't. I actually seem to go umless when I have a script, as I presumably would for video essay. Fake U13, but yeah, she was going through an incredibly rapid political evolution. If you go back and look at Amy Therese in like 2019, I think that, you know, she, I think she was, a little crazy, but like she had basically good politics. I think she was basically right back then. That at the end of the day, she had sort of reasonable and correct criticisms of some of the goofy things about the left, but she was a Marxist, right? And then she went on this speed run over the next few years from that to the point where, like, I mean, I saw an interaction with her on Twitter, between her and Matt McManus, um, a couple weeks ago, where Matt, was reading Pat Buchanan's book, like from like this Pat Buchanan book from the '90s, because that's the kind of thing that Matt would do, and he talks about Buchanan saying that it's okay for German immigrants to come over, but not Mexican immigrants. And Amy jumps on to defend that and to list off all the reasons why, it's okay for Germans but not Mexicans to come over because Germans are better in all these ways, and one of them was they're more.
And that's why we should have never let the Fuentes family into the United States.
Yes. One of them was that the Germans are more beautiful, and she said,
That's a bit on the nose.
and and she said that if you can't see that we want to let in the better people but not the worst people, that you're in the grips of slave morality. So some just nice, like, solid 19-year-old Groiper kind of stuff going on there. So she's gone all the way there, and there was a point in her in the course of her making the speed run. She might not have gotten quite all the way to where she is now, but she was most of the way. Uh, when JD Vance was starting to run for the Senate, when he went on her podcast, and I've listened. I haven't listened to the whole thing. I suppose someday in a post game or something we'll choke it all down, right? But I've listened to.
It's really a shame that during this period, because it's plausible enough that he didn't go on Red Scare. That would have been great.
Yeah, I don't think JD ever did go on Red Scare.
I definitely don't think he did, because it would have come up. I read their Reddit, so it would have come up in the past few weeks. But
Yeah,
it would have fit perfectly, and it would be great to listen back on now.
yeah, no, it totally would have. It's actually weird that he didn't. But yeah, then I could add that to the list because one of the Red Scare hosts, I interviewed Dasha from Red Scare once back when she was still sort of a leftist, and I had a extensive argument with her. When I saw her in LA last year. So I could have thrown her in, but yeah, like I think that this does go to just how weird JD Vance is, because there are these sort of fringe characters who I've interacted with as a too online leftist who enjoys getting into political debates with whatever weird fringe characters on the other side are willing to talk to me. And the fact that the Republican candidate for vice president is friends with these people, again, I think is significant. I mean, I'm kind of embarrassed that I know who some of these people are.
It was interesting with Miniature Smallbug, as you were saying in the article, that basically you're making a large part of what you said about him is basically saying he's a massive racist, but he is actually someone who, at least in their world, is kind of a moderate on race because
Yeah,
he won't actually come out and explicitly say it's genetics, it's human biodiversity or whatever. He kind of he's like, oh, I don't know if it's cultural or genetic or whatever.
that's true. He does have, and like I will say that Yarvin, in my observation of him, does have kind of a extremely based mode and a much more cautious mode. So if so for
The king atop the Motte and Bailey.
yeah, exactly. So so like the morning that I did my debate with him, I remember it was in Chicago, and I remember I was like, I went for a run along the river, and I was listening on my headphones to Yarvin's debate with Cenk Uygur, and for whatever reason with Cenk, that was much more the cautious mode of Yarvin, and I got the much more based Yarvin, and and I should say, like, backing up a little bit, right? So the other one, the other person I talk about, because it's the other person on Politico's list, who I know is Sohrab Ahmari, who is who's like a conservative intellectual who diverges from standard conservatism in that he wants to combine sort of standard cultural conservative views with social democratic economics, which is a combination that's extremely unusual for the United States, but is not unheard of elsewhere.
Right, and you hear about it a lot, and it's normally entirely fake, but he's at least somewhat serious about it, but that's presumably because he's not actually a politician.
Yeah, precisely. Right. I think that, like, nearly everybody else who talks this way is full of shit. But I think because, I think Sorab is I mean, like, again, he's a writer and editor, and and like, he actually is like a intellectual type rather than somebody who exercises political power, which means that there are things that, there are like combinations of views that are eccentric that he can hold that in practice somebody who's like trying to gain political power in the Republican Party is never going to hold.
Right, because
Uh,
he doesn't need a base for it. He just needs
yeah,
subscribers.
yeah, exactly, right. So
I is Compact profitable? I assume not. 'Cause they pay a lot, but maybe they are.
That is a good question. I don't know. I suspect it's not that profitable. I don't have any specific reason to know that, except that like magazines like that usually aren't, right. So I don't know. But yeah, that, and I think that, like, as far as Sorab goes, I think that insofar as his views on social and cultural issues are just standard Republican stuff, I'm sure there's plenty of agreement with JD Vance on that. Insofar as he diverges from standard Republican stuff, I actually don't think that there's much influence because, to the, just because I think that JD Vance actually is full shit on all that stuff, right? I mean, he, like, in some ways, the JD Vance specialty is kind of coming up with these convoluted populist explanations for why he's opposed to anything that would actually infringe on capital in any significant way. So, Medicare for all is actually this is something JD Vance said when he was on Tucker Carlson years ago. Medicare for all is actually a giveaway to the professional class because it would involve the government giving doctors money. That's an example. Uh, like, it's silly, right? But it's just like, JD Vance is like just enough of a nerd that he feels the need to come up with some explanation to try to square these circles.
Right.
Whereas like a more normal politician would just ignore the contradiction. But the explanations are always just kind of bizarre on their face. You know, Free daycare for the government would be class war on normal people because some poll that he looked up that found that 44% of people who didn't go to college and only 35% of people who did say that their preferred family model would be one parent stays home with the kids, right? Like, that's it's just ridiculous. The PRO Act, which would eliminate some of the features of American labor law that make it uniquely difficult to organize unions in the United States as opposed to comparable nations, would be bad because it would solidify the shop by shop structure of American labor law, and sectoral bargaining would be better, which is the sort of thing that, like, yeah, it gives him something to say. It sort of doesn't make any sense if you think about it for 30 seconds because,
Right, because it would require him to support laws that would increase union density by like an order of magnitude.
yeah, exactly. It obviously doesn't do that, right? So it's this,
Or create like a tiny elite of like union members who like control all labor relations in the United States, which presumably is the kind of thing that he'd actually be big mad at. But
yeah,
maybe Medicious Moldbug would think it's based, but actually he'd think it's the cathedral.
yeah. I mean, I think that any version of sectoral bargaining that actually had positive effects would have to rely on there being incredibly powerful unions on the workers' side of the sector-wide bargaining table. I mean, you could do some sort of council where you just like appointed somebody as the representative of the workers or whatever, but then it's not going to be, it's not going to
Right?
be that.
Why would he represent the workers when he could just not?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, on the Sorab point, right? As much as I obviously disagree with all the sort of standard Republican social and cultural positions, I actually wish there was some real influence there, but I see no evidence of that. On the Yarvin point, it's an interesting question. He has described Yarvin as a friend. He has certainly spouted some very Yarvin-y sounding stuff um, at various points. And I would just say it's possible that this is an affectation, right? You know, he could be full of shit on a lot of this too. But I do think that based on my experience with the mold bug, that it's, you know, I'd like, I think that more people should, like journalists, should ask him questions about this because because Yarvin has some pretty eye popping views. For people who aren't familiar with the sort of most at the most basic level, Yarvin will actually refer to himself as a monarchist, which is, you know, a bit unusual for somebody who's cited as an influence, you know, by a major party candidate for vice president in the United States of America. And
Obviously, like as a British person, it comes off as banally centrist and cucked, but that's really not what he's going for.
yeah, exactly.
Wow,
It's
you support the monarchy? Sick.
extremely unusual for the United States. We
They're just
did,
like Keir Starmer.
yeah, right. So you know, you might not be aware of this. This is a pretty deep cut, but we actually fought a war about this exact thing, right? You know, so not being ruled by a monarch, and uh, in his
I mean, I think that's basically what they're planning in the neo spoil system of Project
the
2025.
the base cathedral, yeah, yeah, right. And I mean, like the Project 20, like JD Vance is very Project 2025 ish. In, you know, I mean, it's uh, I mean, I'm sure he's, you know, since Trump has thrown those guys under the bus, I'm sure he's gone along with that, of course, right? But like, but that's exactly like they're definitely singing the tune that he has for a long time. It's like, oh, you got to get rid of all the career civil servants, replace them with toadies, and you know, ignore, you know, the courts, you know, when they get mad and blah blah blah, right? Like this is all,
It's funny
uh,
because normally when we're talking about kind of Republicans and them being conservative or whatever, it usually means, you know, the classic thing of being like 40-year-old liberalism or whatever. But the whole 2025 federal civil servant spoil system is a point where they're genuinely reactionary because they want to take the US back maybe like 170 years.
right, right. Yeah, true. So yeah, when Yarvin explains what he means by monarchism, and by the way, I would strongly recommend anybody who reads my essay and is curious about this and, to supplement it with Matt McManus wrote an article for Commonweal last year, a couple of years ago, uh, that's that's very that's very fun. So he said, yes, Yarvin's case against democracy. Yes, it's from the beginning of last year, so like a year and a half ago. Yarvin's case against democracy. Curtis Yarvin is too elitist for fascism, by
Yeah,
Matt
yeah,
McManus,
exactly.
Commonweal, and I really like that article because the approach Matt takes is like, I think he doesn't fall into the temptation that people often do when they're writing about people like Yarvin, which is to sort of um, pump him up as this like Prince of Darkness in a way that actually fits perfectly with his preferred Brandon, right? You know, that's kind of how he
Right.
wants.
He wants people to know him as the mold bug.
Yeah, and I think if you're like, this guy's actually just kind of this weird, embarrassing jackass, that like that's
He's Nick Land, but won't admit to being properly racist.
yeah. Um, and yeah, he gets into a lot of this, you know, weird metaphors that Yarvin likes about dark elves and stuff like that, and you know he
I
uh,
didn't know he was a Drow stan. I must have missed that.
yeah, let's, so he says, okay, so here we go. Uh, while his terminology has often shifted over time, this commitment to vanguardist elitism has remained a through line of Yarvin's writing. in the recent Gray Mirror, that's Yarvin Substack post titled "You Can Only Lose the Culture War," Yarvin discourages the conservative hobbits who form the Republican base from imagining they will wield real power if the liberal establishment is defeated. The job of the conservative base is instead to give, quote, absolute power, unquote, to a new ruling class of, quote, dark elves, unquote, who will implement conservative policies on the hobbits' behalf. The struggle
Isn't JD Vance a fan of the whole Hobbits thing?
probably control the struggle for the control of the state will last until a quote coalition of the middle and upper classes, the civilized classes, can be formed, unquote, when quote victory is certain regardless of the numbers of the underclass. At this point, Yarvin's vaguely defined reset will occur and democracy will wither away. Everyone, because Matt adds, everyone will then benefit from the kind of autocratic management that's recently taken Twitter to new heights. Yeah, this is.
I mean, Twitter has been taken to new heights, but it's not
Yeah,
heights that, for instance, Capital recognizes. Like, I enjoy it, but
sure.
he doesn't.
Yeah, certain kind of taste there that, you know. Yeah, it's. So when he's explaining the monarchism, Yarvin says a few things, some of which are more based and some of which are more cautious. He really likes analogies to the end of the Roman Republic and the rise of Augustus, um, and and he also likes analogies to tech startup CEOs. So, like, America needs a CEO. He
Wow, imagine America being run by someone who's for the capitalist class. Wouldn't that be fucking crazy? I'm so edgy.
and sometimes it sounds like all he's advocating is a really extreme version of like the sort of George W. Bush, you know, unitary executive view. And sometimes it sounds like he's advocating, like, you know, Augustus, who, like, famously, um, you know, created the office of what would, you know, we'd think of now as emperor, and passed it on like a family heirloom to his wife's degenerate son. And you know, that second one sounds like we just wouldn't have democracy anymore. The first one sounds like, oh, you want to like beef up executive power a bit. And he, you know, at the very least, I think I actually said something like this at one point in my debate with him in Chicago. It's a little bit strange, right? Since I think some of the sort of based populist types who've decided that Yarvin is very based think that like George W. Bush was very bad. But it seems to me that, you know, the closest we've gotten in recent history to the president should just be this, I don't know, Roman emperor CEO figure who does whatever the fuck he wants, would indeed, right, be the Bush reaction to 9/11. That, you know, it's like, oh, we can have, we can detain people all over the world outside of, without the judiciary having nothing to say about it. You know, we can do, you know, warrantless mass surveillance. We can send flying killer robots around the world to, you know, to kill people without any sort of oversight from other branches of government.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with calling for authoritarianism, right? What if the guy that gets in is cringe?
I know it's a real problem in based authoritarianism theory.
Yeah, what if
The
he's cringe and bans your Substack and puts you in the concentration camps? Like,
Yeah, that is a major problem. Yeah, yeah, I don't know, but I will say that I, you know, as much as a point about how sort of weird and unsavory JD Vance is, the monarchism would be a perfectly reasonable place to leave it, because, you know, one might hope that whatever other arguments we could have about capitalism and socialism and all of that stuff, you know, monarchism is bad would sort of be a American given. Um, I will say that I came in to my encounter with Yarvin knowing about the monarchism, and at the risk of exposing myself as a total, you know, lib, not very based at all. Um, I was pretty repulsed by the open racism. So
Is he
that
Jewish?
I think Yarvin actually is, yeah.
Right.
Uh, that's you know, but he is, which is funny because he also likes to. McManus talks about this in the Commonweal article. He even does sort of stick a toe in the waters of making based comments about World War II. Uh,
Right, because that's funny because all the cathedral stuff derives from Nick Land, and Nick Land is one of the committed like anti-Semitic racists
yeah,
because he really believes in IQ, and so the
right.
Jews, like the Chinese, are obviously good, and so
Yeah,
it's like Nietzsche in his later years. Nick Land in his later years spends most of his time like arguing with anti-Semites.
yeah. I mean, this is yeah. I mean, look, much like what if a cringe person inherits the throne as a problem for authoritarianism, the oh but wait aren't Jews smart problem is a big issue for all the racist stereotypes are true theory. And
I mean, also, I mean, obviously, it's
of,
it's
there is a way to have both here, right? That like
right.
they're clever in an insidious way, and that's why you have to really watch out for them.
Well, it
Um,
depends on value, right? Because for Nick Land, he's all about intelligence, and the Jews are good. But if you're about like, I don't know, you're focusing on like German athleticism, then it's less of an issue.
right. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know all of Yarvin's Jewish takes. Like I said, he has definitely. There's a point
I didn't
where
bring that out of the blue, everyone. If anyone that hasn't read the article, he jokes about the Holocaust in
yeah,
Ben's earshot, apparently.
yes, twice. Yeah. So okay, so actually, so this is a nice critical passage from the McManus piece. Yarvin dismisses C. Wright Mills and Noam Chomsky's claims that the wealthy elite constitute an unaccountable political elite in the United States. The real unaccountable elite, Yarvin claims, consists of people like Chomsky himself. In his open letter, Yarvin claims that by the quote Chomsky era, the military corporate financial conspiracy was approaching the plausibility, if not the maliciousness, of its international Jewish counterpart. So that's him being anti-Semitic, I suppose. Uh, but this is the part I was getting to. In a gentle introduction, the conspiratorialism becomes even more sinister. Yarvin claims that the standard terminology of the Second World War is inaccurate. That's because, quote, allies were an axis, cooperating ruthlessly and efficiently. The axis were an alliance, cooperating grudgingly and without trust. The allies were the empire. The axis were the rebels. The Axis never had a real plan for world domination, whereas the Allies had it figured out long before. So, yeah. So he does dip toe in that water, but yes, in my earshot twice. His joke was that the debate was going to be about whether it was really 6 million or whether it was more like 5.5, which is some quality based Mencius Moldbug humor. And
Yeah, if you told me that to me and I hadn't read it, I probably would laugh.
sure, fair enough. Uh, and and yeah, but that's just kind of like I think it's distasteful, but it is clearly a joke. Um, I don't think he's actually despite everything, he's probably not actually a Holocaust denier.
Yeah, I mean, structurally, the joke is kind of not necessarily trivializing the Holocaust, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
that's right.
he's not like what he's the joke isn't the joke is based on a trivial difference between millions of people dying or millions of people dying, right?
Yeah. No, that's also very true. So it's like it manages to be very based and like, oh, look at me, I'm like, doing triggery jokes, but also to, incorporate the assumption the Holocaust happened, it was bad, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
roughly happened as described.
yeah, exactly. But uh, but yeah, he's not quite based enough, at least from my interactions with him, to quite embrace the human biodiversity stuff with both hands. Although, um, apparently there was anyway, there's some ambiguity about that, but but he
Which
does
obviously,
definitely.
like, if he's trying to not be completely marginal, is the right thing to do, because it is totally
Right.
like a third rail to commit to that. Which I'm not
Yeah.
particularly sad about, but it definitely is.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think he can't quite decide how marginal he wants to be, but
He
but yeah,
wants people to think he's marginal, but not actually to be
yeah,
like
yeah. He
like most musical artists.
That seems right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to be a sellout, but I do want to make a lot of money. Yeah, I think there is something there. Uh, so so yeah, his he definitely is. He definitely at least flirts heavily with human biodiversity stuff. And in fact, the back of the cab story is is Yarvin. I mean, mostly he spent these conversations just kind of monologuing and occasionally asking if I'd read whatever he's monologuing about. But there was uh, there was a point where he asked if I believed in, the mind is like the blank slate theory, or use some phrase like that. Uh, which I said no, because this is actually something I've written about more than once. My view is that egalitarians don't actually need to deny that human nature is a thing, or that has its it has its dark side, right? But and I think I maybe even started to try to say that, and he just kind of cut me off and went back to monologuing. And then apparently in podcasts he's been on since then, and he's been like, I don't know, I mean, Ben's acting like he's horrified by the human biodiversity stuff, but he agreed when I asked him, right? So it,
Oh
it's
dear.
either the human mind is a totally blank slate, until influences come in, or like different races have different brains. I guess those are the only two options. Um, but in
They
any
map,
case,
they map exactly onto whatever the political economy of the 21st century Earth happens to be.
amazing. Yeah, and
They just that determinate and real.
he's certainly very clear that he believes that. Well, he actually said at one point, he was quoting some, uh, I don't know what writer he was quoting when he said this, but it's like, oh, I've never met a human being. I've only met like a Frenchman or a blah 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 or a blah blah blah, right? So he's very clear that he thinks that different peoples have these different qualities, even if he's a bit evasive when asked point blank whether whether this is genetic or cultural in origin. He definitely believes that there are these like national characters that have massive explanatory value, and thus he believes in the specific example that we spent the most time arguing about, that uh, Haiti is a mess of chaos and poverty, not for reasons that perhaps have something to do with the last couple hundred years of more or less nonstop imperial meddling, coups, invasions, hyper exploitation. But
Right. I mean, Haiti, as you point out, is one of the ones where it's like very direct, straightforward, exactly like balance of payment thing that they had going from day one. Where it's like they basically had like a video game style debuff, where just
right,
their treasury from day one was like 70% less or whatever, because they had to pay from the day they became independent until I think 2005, an indemnity to France.
yeah. Spencer, if you think that I'm arguing that anybody should vote for Harris, you haven't been listening very closely, possibly because you're bad at listening,
I
because you
think
have a nit.
mostly Spencer's been arguing with people in the chat and not really listening to us, which is fine.
Oh, good.
You're all welcome in chat to do that.
All right, Spencer. I'm sorry if I impugned you unfairly. That's it. Just annoys the shit out of me when people attribute these views. That's like, man, this is like it's an old joke, but it's like they're like, I like waffles, so you're saying you hate pancakes. Like, man, that is a new sentence, right? Like, just let's just focus on the one I'm saying.
I'm
Like,
gonna tell chat not to vote for Kamala so many times this year.
yeah. Uh,
By the way, Spencer, I did agree with you when you said earlier, where I think you were actually addressing us, where I don't think JD Vance is a racist, or he's at least not particularly racist. He's not unusually racist. He's probably below average racist by quite a lot for a Republican.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know how racist Vance is. So this is, I think that what we're clear on is that he has cited as an influence somebody who's extremely racist, like way more racist than the Republican average. And whether he agrees with his views or not, I don't presume to have any special insight on, right? But I do think that somebody in the somebody who wanted to practice journalism might productively ask him some hard questions about this stuff, right? And yeah, I think in the Haiti case in particular, it's a really it's a really striking example because he's just so confident that what explains why like Norway is the way it is and Haiti is the way it is like the sort of innate qualities of Norwegians and Haitians, or he said at one point you could like swap out the population of like Haiti with Japan and the Japanese people would be fine, right? In the same circumstances.
It'd
Uh,
be really crowded.
yeah. And, and it's such a clear example, right? Because like if you actually look at the historical record, this is literally, they obviously to gain its freedom initially, the Haitian Revolution, I mean, by the time they'd fought off the French attempt to reinvade and everything, like the Haitian economy was just utterly destroyed, like to an extent that there are very few examples of in any country, right? To that degree, they're from the moment they basically, as the price of the French not trying to reinvade again, they had to pay reverse reparations for the lost property in the revolution, i.e. the slaves, and that debt was took up a massive share of the GDP, and it was only completely paid off in I think the late 1940s, and there was even when there was an American invasion and occupation in between, they didn't like forgive the debt. It was just sort of transferred to a new bank, and then very shortly afterwards, the Duvalier dictatorship was installed, and was backed up by the United States for standard Cold War reasons. That lasted, first Papa Doc and then Baby Doc until the 1980s, when that was first overthrown. The first democratically elected president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who I remember reading many years ago that one of his slogans when he first ran for president is he wanted to raise the Haitian people from misery to poverty. That was overthrown in a coup where it's at least a little unclear. I think it's a matter of record that some of the people involved in the coup had previously been on the CIA payroll, whether they were actually working for it at that time or whether they were freelancing by that time. I think is a little bit more disputable. They and then the U.S. with one hand restores Aristide in the mid '90s, and then takes him away again in the early 2000s. He's actually escorted out of the country by U.S. Marines in 2004. The last foreign troops don't leave Haiti until 2017. You have, Moise assassinated by people who seem to have a lot of Miami connections in 2021, and it just seems like, look, this is, which part of this is ancient history that has no relevance to the present, right? It's fucking silly, right? And it's worth dwelling on because it's such an extreme example of this kind of culturalist explanation. Being generous, it's called a culturalist explanation. Being
You're like,
being
what culture does he mean? Like,
yeah. I mean, and again,
could he name the first feature about like francophone Black Caribbean culture? Like,
yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's yeah, I think he just thinks it's so obvious that they're not like us that it's just kind of laughable to think that there are these structural explanations as opposed to just like, oh, those people are like that. Because again, he does have this deep belief in national characters and their explanatory value and all of that stuff. And yeah, I don't, my 2 cents, based on my interactions
based.
with him, are that yeah, I mean, look, I've debated lots of people I think are bad people who make the world worse, but I think he was by far the most unpleasant one. Like just as a vibes assessment. Um, so yeah, my 2 cents on this, based on my interaction with him, is that the that this is pretty gross, and considering that JD is running to be the vice president of a extremely old man who eats fast food all the time, and might very well not survive
I mean,
this.
that's the crazy thing, right? That they seem to have picked JD Vance because they're like, well, who cares? Like, like, he can just be there, like, we're going to win because it's against Biden. But, like, regardless of Biden dropping out or not, there was always a good chance that JD Vance is going to become president in the next 4 years.
Totally. Right. I think if Trump wins, there's an excellent chance that JD Vance could become president. And so again, I think in the interest of journalism, I think that having a pretty good read on this guy who certainly has, at least Vance himself has claimed, has influenced some of his views. I think that some follow up questions on this would be all to the good. But I think, again, at the very least, look, you know if I'd had debates with two of the people who were on some list of the 6 people who've had the most influence on Kamala Harris, I certainly would have written something about that. Um, I actually did talk for a while in the Capital class today about an essay written by Kamala Harris's dad
Mm.
about Capital. But sadly, I don't think that Harris Sr. is going to be any kind of influence at all on Kamala if she wins.
You need to do a show about like Pete Buttigieg's dad and Kamala's dad. Whether they were good Marxists or maybe they were actually cringe.
Yeah. Well, a little bit of each, I think. I have agreements and disagreements with Harris, with Donald Harris, but he's clearly the. It is hilarious that these Marxist academics keep having kids who rebel against them and become soulless neoliberal technocrats. I
I mean,
mean,
it makes sense that like if you have like political parents, that
yeah,
you won't necessarily get into their politics, but you'll get into like politics.
yeah. I,
Like,
I, I
and then
mean,
like the path of least resistance there is just becoming a Democrat, right?
it says something about Pete Buttigieg's parents' politics that apparently Cornel West sometimes babysat Pete Buttigieg as a kid.
That's cute. I was also going to say before we end that I think the fact that Kenya is now occupying Haiti is like a very interesting world historic event.
Yeah, that is that.
One which is good, but one which is interesting.
Yeah, it's not good, but it's definitely interesting. It definitely says something about the ways that the world system, if you want to use that terminology, has changed over the centuries. Um, but
It's going
yeah,
to be interesting as kind of, I mean, if it happens, because you can just see Africa getting permanently trapped in like a debt trap and so on for as long as capitalism exists. But if they do actually become like progressive income countries, which then have this massive population, which have a big influence in the world, it will be funny seeing American liberals being like, wow, African countries can be bad too.
yeah. I mean, there is this. I do think that this is the sort of thing that like a certain percentage of my chat reacts badly to, but c'est la vie. I think that there is this real tendency. I mean, Africa, I think, would be an even more extreme version if it happened, right? But there is this real tendency of a lot of people who want to be anti-imperialist to have trouble internalizing this really profound insight about geopolitics that I'm about to give you, which is that sometimes more than one thing can be bad. Uh, but
Right. It just emerges out of internet arguments where if you say like, if they're like, Hamas throws homosexuals off rooftops, and you're like, well, they don't, that's made up. And they're like, well, it is illegal in the Gaza Strip. And you go, yeah, I mean, it is. They're like, you fucking lost, bitch.
it's like, no, you said something that was wrong, and then you said something that was right, and I disagreed with the first thing, and then I agreed with the second thing, right? That's yeah. No, that is a charming feature of internet arguments. But yeah, I mean, I think that like yes, American interventionism being bad is a true premise that leads people to think that capitalist nations doing interventionism around the world is good and anti-imperialist, and it's all kind of a weird mess, and it doesn't make any sense. But I will say, anticipating the final question, then I am going to be gone next week. I don't know if you've got a solo thing up your sleeve, but
Well, with a week's notice, I'm able to think of one.
yeah, fair enough. I think last time I gave you like 12 hours, uh, but but yeah, I'm going to be staying in an Airbnb, and the checkout time is like 2 hours before we do this. So
Well, I guess
I'm actually
you'll be writing an essay.
so yeah, I guess in 2 weeks when we do this again, we'll probably be talking about whatever I write for next week. And
Because you shockingly put out an article about how socialism might work.
yes, exactly. And I so the thing that so I'm not 100% sure yet, but I've been reading a very bad book written by a philosopher, and so it would seem appropriate to write something about how bad it is. It's called The Right to Sex, Feminism in the 21st Century by Amy Srinivasan. And I think, and this will also be one to get a different group mad in the chat, since
I mean, because I was going to say, like, it'd be fun to do the socialism essay, and then we can argue about abolishing the value form.
oh
Um,
yeah, we
but
certainly could do that. If you wanted to, yeah. So we certainly could switch it up and argue about abolishing the value form. I should also say, actually, that if we don't do that in 2 weeks from now, because we decide to do the one that's more recent than that, if you have a abolishing the value form guest essay in you, that could also be a fun thing to do sometime.
cool. No, but the sex thing sounds fun.
Yeah. So we might be doing that in 2 weeks. We will see.
Sex sounds fun.
I've heard rumors, but it sounds fun. Yeah.